The rifle lay across the colonel's desk like an accusation. Its walnut stock bore the deep scars of combat, each groove telling a story that most would never live to share. Colonel Marcus Delacroix had seen thousands of weapons in his 30-year career, but the battle honors etched into the barrel made his hands tremble as he lifted it. Afghanistan 2009-2012, Iraq 2014-2015, Syria 2018. Each theater marking a ghost he thought he'd buried. "Where did you get this?" His voice cracked despite his best efforts. Captain Vera Ghost Nakamura sat motionless in the uncomfortable plastic chair, her dark eyes reflecting nothing. She'd been called many things during her 12 years in service, but never weak. The rumors followed her like smoke through the barracks. The female pilot who couldn't handle real combat, who got transferred from unit to unit because nobody wanted dead weight in their squadron. They saw her slight frame, her quiet demeanor, and made assumptions that would haunt them forever. "Inherited it, sir." 3 words that contained multitudes. Delacroix's fingers traced the serial numbers, comparing them to the classified files spread across his desk. The documents painted an impossible picture. This rifle belonged to Master Sergeant Alina Nakamura, killed in action during Operation Crimson Dawn in 2019. The same Alina Nakamura listed as Vera's older sister. The same operation that had been scrubbed from public records, leaving only whispers in Pentagon corridors about the team that never came home. Thunder rolled across the base, shaking the windows of the administrative building. Beyond the glass, F-16 Fighting Falcons sat like sleeping predators on the tarmac, their gray forms barely visible through the desert heat shimmer. Captain Nakamura hadn't moved, hadn't even blinked since entering his office. Her flight suit bore no decorations, no combat ribbons, no indication of the hell she'd apparently witnessed. "Your transfer request mentions combat experience," Delacroix said carefully, "but your official record shows nothing beyond routine transport missions." A ghost of a smile crossed her lips. "Records can be deceiving, sir." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant hum of aircraft engines warming up on the flight line. Somewhere in the maze of classified files and black operations, a story waited to be told. A story about a pilot who'd been written off before she'd even had the chance to prove herself. About a sister's death that had been buried beneath layers of national security and political necessity. Delacroix closed the file, his decision already made. Ghost Squadron needed a new pilot, and despite every instinct telling him to transfer her to another desk job, something about Captain Nakamura's unwavering stare convinced him otherwise. He had no idea he was about to unleash a legend. Outside, the storm was just beginning. Captain Vera Nakamura's boots clicked against the polished floor as she walked through the corridors of Langley Air Force Base. 24 hours had passed since her meeting with Colonel Delacroix, and the weight of her sister's rifle seemed heavier with each step. The other pilots barely acknowledged her presence, their conversations dying to whispers as she passed. She'd grown accustomed to the isolation, the way rooms emptied when she entered, the snickers that followed her call sign. Ghost Squadron's ready room buzzed with nervous energy. Major Thompson, a bull-necked pilot with Arkansas drawl thick as molasses, looked up from his pre-flight checklist with undisguised annoyance. "Well, well, the infamous ghost finally graces us with her presence." His cronies chuckled, but there was something forced about their laughter. Captain Mitchell Reaper Santos, Ghost Squadron's executive officer, stood near the tactical display. His weathered face showed the strain of too many combat missions, too many friends lost to enemy fire. Unlike the others, he studied Nakamura with calculating eyes. Veterans recognized other veterans, regardless of what their files claimed. "Briefing starts in 5, Santos announced, his voice cutting through the chatter. "We've got movement in the Syrian corridor. Intelligence suggests a high-value target is moving through contested airspace tonight." Nakamura took her position at the back of the room, her silence drawing more attention than words ever could. The mission briefing revealed a complex operation, multiple air assets, precise timing, and the kind of coordination that separated elite units from everyone else. On paper, it looked routine. Experience taught her that nothing was ever routine. "Ghost, you'll be flying wing position," Thompson declared with obvious satisfaction. "Try to keep up." The assignment stung, relegating her to a supporting role while others took point. But Nakamura had learned patience in the hardest school imaginable. Her sister Elena had taught her that respect wasn't given. It was earned one mission at a time, one impossible shot at a time, one moment of courage that defined everything that followed. As the briefing concluded, Santos approached her station. "Your birds prepped on runway 7, he said quietly. "Maintenance chief says she's never seen an F-22 configured quite like you requested." Indeed, Nakamura's Raptor carried modifications that raised eyebrows among ground crew. Enhanced targeting systems, upgraded radar arrays, and a custom paint scheme that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The aircraft looked predatory even while stationary, its angular form suggesting violence barely contained. She performed her pre-flight inspection with methodical precision, checking systems that most pilots took for granted. Each component represented a potential failure point, a moment where skill meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic loss. Her hands moved across the controls with practiced efficiency, muscle memory guiding movements honed through countless hours of training. The other pilots emerged from the ready room, their bravado masking the same pre-mission tension that affected everyone. Combat was democracy's great equalizer. Bullets didn't care about prejudice or politics. The desert wind was beginning to build, carrying sand and the promise of a storm that would complicate their mission. Perfect flying weather for someone who'd earned her reputation in impossible conditions. Night fell across the Syrian desert like a curtain dropping on an empty stage. The silence was absolute, broken only by the whisper of wind across ancient sand dunes and the distant rumble of artillery that never seemed to cease. In this forgotten corner of the world, where empires had risen and fallen for millennia, modern warfare played out its latest act. Ghost Squadron's F-22 Raptors cut through the darkness at 30,000 feet, their stealth technology rendering them invisible to enemy radar systems. From the ground, they were nothing more than shadows against stars, phantoms hunting phantoms in a war that had no clear beginning and promised no clean ending. "Ghost Lead, this is Reaper. Target convoy is moving through checkpoint Alpha 7, bearing 270 at 15 clicks." Santos's voice crackled through the encrypted radio channel, professional and calm despite the complexity of their mission. Major Thompson's response carried the cocky confidence that had made him both feared and respected throughout the squadron. "Copy that, Reaper. Ghost 2, maintain overwatch position. This is how real pilots handle business." Captain Nakamura's acknowledgement was barely audible. "Ghost 2, maintaining position." But her fingers were already dancing across her targeting system, acquiring locks on multiple ground vehicles with precision that would have impressed her instructors at Top Gun. The convoy below consisted of 6 armored vehicles moving in standard formation, their thermal signatures glowing like beacons in her infrared display. Something wasn't right. Nakamura had spent enough time studying enemy tactics to recognize when patterns deviated from normal. The convoy's spacing was too perfect, their route too predictable. Intelligence had indicated a high-value target, but this felt more like bait than prey. "Ghost Lead, be advised. Pattern recognition suggests possible ambush scenario." Her warning carried the weight of experience that her fellow pilots couldn't yet recognize. Thompson's laugh filled the radio channel. "Negative, Ghost 2. Intel is solid. Maintain your position and let the grown-ups work." Below them, the desert erupted in light and violence. Surface-to-air missiles streaked upward like deadly fireworks, their exhaust trails painting bright lines against the darkness. The convoy had been a trap, designed to draw American aircraft into a kill zone prepared with military precision that spoke of foreign training and sophisticated planning. Sams, break right." Thompson's voice had lost its arrogance, replaced by the sharp edge of panic that every combat pilot learned to recognize. The night sky became a deadly ballet of evasion and survival. Chaff and flares blossomed like metallic flowers as the squadron scattered, their formation dissolving under the pressure of multiple missile locks. Electronic warfare systems screamed warnings as enemy radar painted them with targeting solutions that promised death from below. Nakamura's Raptor rolled inverted, diving toward the desert floor in a maneuver that would have killed lesser pilots. Her aircraft shuddered as she pulled negative G-forces that tested both machine and human endurance. Behind her, missiles that had seemed impossibly fast suddenly became manageable threats, their guidance systems confused by her aggressive defensive flying. This was where legends were born, in the space between heartbeats, where training met instinct and survival demanded perfection. The missile that found Ghost lead came without warning. One moment Major Thompson's F-22 was executing a textbook evasive maneuver. The next it was falling toward the Syrian desert in 3 burning pieces. His ejection seat never fired. The explosion painted the night sky in orange and red, a brief supernova that illuminated the horror below. "Ghost lead is down! Ghost lead is down!" Reaper's voice carried the kind of anguish that would echo in nightmares for years to come. "I have multiple chutes in the air. Ground teams are moving toward the crash site." Captain Nakamura's response came without hesitation. "Ghost 2 is going in." Negative, RTB immediately. The whole area is hot." But Ghost was already diving, her Raptor's engine screaming as she descended toward the kill zone that had claimed her squadron leader. The mathematics of combat search and rescue were brutally simple. Every second of delay decreased survival probability exponentially. Thompson might have been an arrogant bastard, but he was her arrogant bastard, and no pilot left another pilot behind. The desert floor rushed up to meet her with terrifying speed. At 200 feet, she leveled off and began a low-altitude search pattern that would have been suicidal in daylight. Her infrared system swept the crash debris, looking for the thermal signature that would indicate a surviving pilot. The wreckage was scattered across half a mile, twisted metal that had once been America's most advanced fighter aircraft. "Ghost 2, you are ordered to abort. Repeat, abort your search and return to base immediately." Colonel Delacroix's voice had replaced Santos on the radio, carrying the weight of direct command authority. "Unable to comply, Colonel. I have movement on the ground." It wasn't entirely true. The thermal contacts she'd spotted were definitely human, but whether they were friendly or enemy remained unclear. What was certain was that enemy forces were converging on the crash site with military precision. Pickup trucks mounted with heavy machine guns, infantry teams with shoulder-fired missiles, and what appeared to be a command vehicle coordinating their movements. Nakamura's targeting computer painted the scene in deadly detail. 30-plus enemy combatants, multiple vehicle-mounted weapons, and terrain that offered no concealment for a downed pilot. If Thompson had survived the crash, his life expectancy was measured in minutes rather than hours. Her first gun run scattered the enemy formation like leaves before a hurricane. The Raptor's M61 Vulcan cannon hammered the night with 20mm shells that turned armored vehicles into funeral pyres. She pulled up from her attack run with enemy tracers lighting the sky around her, each bullet a reminder that stealth technology couldn't protect against everything. "Jesus Christ, Ghost, where did you learn to fly like that?" Reaper's voice carried a mixture of admiration and terror that would become familiar to anyone who flew with her. "My sister taught me," 3 words that explained everything and nothing. The truth was more complicated, buried in classified files that documented Elena Nakamura's legendary career as both pilot and forward air controller. The same Alina who had died calling in airstrikes on her own position to save her team. The same Alina whose rifle now served as a reminder that heroism often came at the ultimate price. The rescue that followed would become the stuff of legend. 4 separate gun runs that each should have been fatal, precision flying that defied both physics and common sense, and a landing on improvised desert strip under enemy fire that would be analyzed in flight schools for decades to come. Captain Nakamura extracted not only Thompson's broken body, but also 2 other aircrew members whose own aircraft had been damaged in the initial ambush. The flight back to base was conducted in radio silence, broken only by medical updates on the wounded. Thompson would live, though his flying days were over. The other pilots would recover completely, though their aircraft would need weeks of repair work. Ghost Squadron had taken a beating, but they'd all come home. Colonel Delacroix was waiting on the tarmac when Nakamura's battle-damaged Raptor finally touched down. His expression was unreadable as he approached her aircraft, but his steps carried the measured pace of a man reevaluating everything he thought he knew about combat aviation. "Captain, my office. Now." His words were clipped, professional, but his eyes held something that might have been respect. The debrief lasted 14 hours. Nakamura recounted every detail of the mission with clinical precision, her testimony corroborated by gun camera footage that would eventually find its way to the Pentagon's most classified archives. The tactical analysis revealed a rescue operation conducted with skill that bordered on the supernatural, executed by a pilot who had supposedly never seen combat. "Your official record shows transport missions only," Delacroix finally said, fatigue making his voice hoarse. "But what I witnessed tonight, that wasn't learned flying cargo planes." Nakamura's response was characteristically economical. "I had good teachers, sir." The investigating team from Air Force Special Operations Command arrived the next morning. They interviewed every member of Ghost Squadron, analyzed telemetry data, and reviewed intelligence reports that painted a picture of enemy capabilities far beyond what anyone had expected. The Syrian operation hadn't been a simple convoy interdiction. It had been a carefully orchestrated trap designed to test American air power against the latest in Russian surface-to-air missile technology. Major Thompson, despite his injuries, insisted on attending the final debrief from his hospital bed. His testimony was unequivocal. Captain Nakamura had saved his life and demonstrated flying skills that placed her among the elite pilots of any nation. His recommendation for her immediate promotion to squadron leader was seconded by every member of Ghost Squadron. The paperwork that followed was extensive and largely classified. Nakamura's personnel file was updated to reflect her true service record, including combat deployments that had been scrubbed for security reasons. Her sister Alina's service record was partially declassified, revealing a career that had included some of the most dangerous missions ever flown by American pilots. But perhaps more importantly, the culture of Ghost Squadron began to change. The jokes stopped first, replaced by cautious respect. Then came the questions, quietly asked, carefully answered, about tactics and techniques that pushed the boundaries of what was possible in modern combat aviation. Pilots who had initially dismissed her began to seek her advice on complex maneuvers and combat scenarios. Captain Mitchell Santos observed this transformation with the satisfaction of a commander who had recognized potential long before others. His own combat experience had taught him that the best pilots weren't always the loudest or most aggressive. Sometimes they were the quiet ones who understood that war was ultimately about bringing everyone home alive. The squadron's next mission briefing carried a different energy. Where once there had been casual arrogance, now there was professional focus. The pilots had learned that overconfidence could be fatal, and that underestimating either the enemy or their own squadron mates was a luxury they couldn't afford. The new mission parameters reflected this hard-won wisdom: enhanced intelligence gathering, improved coordination protocols, and backup plans for backup plans. Ghost Squadron was evolving from a collection of individual pilots into something more dangerous, a cohesive unit that understood both its capabilities and limitations. News of the Syrian rescue spread through the Air Force with the speed that only truly impressive stories achieve. Fighter pilot communities are small and insular, connected by informal networks that carry information faster than any official channel. Within weeks, every combat pilot in the service had heard some version of the story about the female pilot who had pulled off an impossible rescue in the Syrian desert. The details grew in the telling, as military stories always do. Nakamura's 4-gun runs became 6, then 8. The number of enemy combatants doubled, then tripled. The damage to her aircraft was described in increasingly dramatic terms, until she was supposedly flying a machine held together by determination and prayer alone. Captain Nakamura herself remained characteristically silent about the growing legend. She flew her missions with the same quiet professionalism that had marked her entire career, neither confirming nor denying the stories that swirled around her call sign. Ghost Squadron's pilots learned to deflect questions from other units, with non-committal responses that only added to the mystique. But within the squadron, a different kind of transformation was taking place. The pilots who had once mocked her dedication to training were now the first to volunteer for additional practice sessions. Combat scenarios that had seemed routine were now approached with the kind of meticulous planning that saved lives when things went wrong. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Cross, recently assigned to Ghost Squadron as operations officer, brought 15 years of combat experience and a reputation for developing innovative tactics. Her first evaluation of the unit's capabilities yielded surprising results. Ghost Squadron was now performing at levels typically associated with units that had been together for years, not months. "There's something different about this squadron," Cross reported to her superiors. "The cohesion is extraordinary, especially considering their recent personnel changes. They're functioning like a unit that's been through combat together multiple times." The truth was simpler and more complex than official reports could capture. Ghost Squadron had found its identity in the space between legend and reality, united by the shared experience of witnessing something that challenged their assumptions about what was possible. They had learned to trust each other not because of official rankings or service records, but because they had seen what real courage looked like when everything else stripped away. Nakamura's leadership style was unlike anything they had experienced. She led by example rather than authority, demonstrated techniques rather than lecturing about them, and created an environment where admitting ignorance was safer than pretending knowledge. Her quiet confidence became the squadron's foundation, even as she continued to fly as a captain rather than seeking the promotion that her demonstrated abilities clearly warranted. The Syrian desert had claimed Major Thompson's arrogance and nearly claimed his life. In return, it had revealed the kind of pilot that emerges once in a generation, someone who understood that individual skill meant nothing without the trust of those who flew beside you. The changing seasons brought new challenges to Ghost Squadron. Winter operations in the mountainous regions of Afghanistan required different skills than the desert flying that had defined their recent missions. Snow-covered peaks created radar shadows where enemy aircraft could hide, while altitude and weather combined to test both pilot endurance and aircraft performance. Captain Nakamura's expertise in high-altitude operations quickly became apparent during their first mountain patrol. While other pilots struggled with the thin air and unpredictable wind patterns, she navigated the treacherous terrain with an ease that suggested extensive experience in similar conditions. Her radio calls were precise and economical, providing navigation references and weather updates that kept the formation safely together despite visibility that dropped to near zero. "Ghost 2, how are you reading these wind patterns so accurately?" Lieutenant Jennifer Phoenix, Walsh asked during a particularly challenging approach to their forward operating base. "Practice," came the characteristic reply, But Walsh noticed that Nakamura's aircraft never seemed to struggle with the conditions that were making her own Raptor buck and slide through the turbulent air. The truth, buried in classified mission reports from her sister's unit, was that Elena Nakamura had pioneered many of the high-altitude tactics now being employed by special operations forces throughout the region. Her forward air control missions had required flying in conditions that would ground most aircraft, calling in precision strikes while operating from improvised airstrips carved into mountainsides. Vera had learned these techniques during weekend visits to Elena's base, unofficial training sessions that had been disguised as family time. The sisters would spend hours discussing the subtle art of mountain flying, how wind patterns revealed themselves through cloud formations, how aircraft performance changed with altitude and temperature, how to read terrain in 3 dimensions rather than simply following GPS coordinates. Those conversations had taken place in the shadow of Elena's eventual deployment to Operation Crimson Dawn, though neither sister had known it at the time. They had been preparing for a war that was already consuming the woman who would never return from it. Ghost Squadron's mountain operations were complicated by intelligence reports of increased enemy activity in the region. Taliban forces, equipped with increasingly sophisticated weapons, were using the harsh terrain to their advantage. Surface-to-air missiles that had once been crude and ineffective were being replaced with systems that rivaled anything used by conventional military forces. The new threat environment required tactical adaptations that pushed the limits of both technology and pilot skill. Low-altitude penetration, flights through mountain valleys, precision strikes against targets hidden in cave systems, and combat air patrols that could last for hours in conditions that tested human endurance to its limits. During one particularly challenging mission, Ghost Squadron was tasked with providing close air support for a special operations team that had become pinned down by enemy fire in a remote valley. The weather was deteriorating rapidly, with storm clouds building against the mountain peaks and visibility dropping with each passing minute. Ghost Lead, this is Hammer 7. We need immediate air support at grid reference. The ground controller's voice was strained with the kind of tension that indicated friendly casualties and dwindling ammunition. Major Santos, now commanding Ghost Squadron after Thompson's medical retirement, made the decision that would define their mission. All Ghost units were going in low and fast, whether window is closing, so this is our only shot. The approach required flying through a narrow valley at altitudes that left no room for error. Mountain peaks rose on both sides, their snow-covered summits lost in clouds that promised severe turbulence and possible icing conditions. The enemy position was located in a canyon system that could only be attacked from specific angles, limiting their tactical options and exposing them to concentrated anti-aircraft fire. Nakamura's voice cut through the tension with calm professionalism. Ghost 2 has the target area visual. Recommend approach from bearing 090. Use ridge line for concealment until final attack run. Her tactical assessment proved correct, allowing the squadron to achieve surprise against enemy forces that had been expecting attack from a different direction. The resulting airstrikes were devastatingly effective, breaking up the enemy formation and allowing the Special Operations team to complete their extraction. But it was Nakamura's flying during the approach that left the deepest impression on her squadron mates. Threading her Raptor through the mountain valley with margins measured in feet rather than yards, she had demonstrated a level of precision that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Her aircraft had become an extension of her will, responding to minute control inputs that kept her clear of both terrain and enemy fire. The flight back to base was conducted in weather conditions that grounded commercial aviation throughout the region. Nakamura served as lead navigator, her ability to read the terrain proving invaluable as conventional navigation systems struggled with the combination of high altitude and atmospheric interference. Lieutenant Walsh, flying wing position on Nakamura's aircraft, would later describe the experience as watching a master class in advanced aviation. "She made it look effortless," Walsh reported during debrief. "But I could see my own aircraft struggling with conditions that didn't seem to affect her at all." Colonel Delacroix's evaluation report noted that Ghost Squadron was operating at efficiency levels that exceeded established benchmarks for similar units. More significantly, their tactical innovations were being studied by Air Force Combat Command for potential implementation across multiple squadrons. The techniques they had developed for mountain operations were proving applicable to a wide range of combat scenarios. The classified section of the report made specific mention of Captain Nakamura's role in developing these capabilities. Her tactical recommendations were being incorporated into training curricula, while her demonstrated flying skills had earned recognition from senior commanders who had initially been skeptical of her credentials. But perhaps the most significant change was the transformation within Ghost Squadron itself. The unit that had once been defined by internal competition and individual egos had evolved into something more dangerous and effective. A team that understood how individual excellence could be multiplied through collective trust and shared purpose. The call came at 3:47 hours on a Tuesday morning that would redefine everything Ghost Squadron thought they knew about modern warfare. Captain Nakamura was awakened by the harsh electronic tone of her encrypted communication device, a sound that every combat pilot learned to hate because it meant someone somewhere was dying and needed immediate help. "Ghost 2, report to operations immediately. Flash priority mission briefing in 10 minutes." The duty officer's voice carried the kind of tension that indicated events were spiraling beyond anyone's control. The briefing room was already crowded when she arrived, filled with personnel she didn't recognize wearing uniforms that suggested Special Operations Command involvement. The mission parameters were unlike anything Ghost Squadron had previously encountered. Deep penetration strike against a target that officially didn't exist, in airspace that was supposedly controlled by Allied forces. Colonel Delacroix looked like a man who had aged a decade in the past hour. His briefing was precise but incomplete, filled with the kind of carefully worded phrases that indicated political considerations were overriding military logic. "Intelligence has identified a high-value target moving through the disputed territory near the Syrian-Turkish border. Time-critical window for interdiction is approximately 6 hours." The satellite imagery told a more complex story. The target convoy consisted of vehicles that appeared to be carrying something requiring specialized transport equipment, heavy trucks with modified trailers, escorted by military vehicles that displayed no national markings. The route they were following would take them through 3 different countries, none of which had officially authorized American military operations. Major Santos studied the tactical display with the expression of a man calculating odds that didn't favor survival. "Sir, this is going to require flying through some very unfriendly airspace. Intel on enemy air defenses is incomplete, and our extraction routes are limited." "Understood, Major. That's why Captain Nakamura will be leading this mission." The words hit the briefing room like a physical blow. Every head turned toward Nakamura, whose expression hadn't changed despite the obvious significance of the assignment. Leading a special operations strike was typically reserved for squadron commanders with decades of combat experience, not captains who had officially been in country for less than 6 months. "Sir, with respect, Ghost 2 doesn't have the experience profile for this type of mission," Santos said carefully, his loyalty to both his subordinate and his chain of command creating an impossible position. "Actually, Major, she has exactly the experience profile we need." Delacroix activated a classified display that showed combat mission records previously hidden from squadron personnel. Captain Nakamura's actual service record includes 17 deep penetration strikes, 12 combat search and rescue operations, and 43 close air support missions in denied territory. The silence that followed was broken only by the hum of ventilation systems and the distant sound of aircraft engines on the flight line. Ghost Squadron's pilots stared at their quiet colleague with the kind of shock that comes from realizing everything you thought you knew was wrong. Nakamura's voice, when she finally spoke, was characteristically calm. "What's the real target, sir?" The question cut through layers of operational security and political doublespeak with surgical precision. Delacroix's response came after a pause that lasted several seconds too long. Chemical weapons components. Syrian government forces are moving precursor materials to a facility that intelligence believes is being used to develop weapons banned by international treaty. The mission suddenly made sense in the brutal way that military logic often did. This wasn't about intercepting a convoy. It was about preventing mass casualties by destroying materials that could kill thousands of innocent civilians. The political sensitivities were secondary to the moral imperative of stopping weapons that indiscriminately targeted noncombatants. Rules of engagement, Nakamura asked, already knowing the answer would complicate everything. Destruction of target materials is authorized. Collateral damage is to be minimized. Deniability is essential. This mission cannot be traced back to American forces. Translation: blow up the chemical weapons while making it look like someone else did it. Don't kill any civilians, and if you get caught, the United States government will deny you ever existed. Nakamura nodded once, her acceptance carrying the weight of everything that her sister Elena had taught her about impossible missions and acceptable losses. Some fights were worth the risk, regardless of personal cost. The mission preparation that followed was unlike anything Ghost Squadron had previously experienced. Intelligence briefings that revealed enemy capabilities far beyond what they had faced in previous operations. Weather analysis that predicted conditions ranging from challenging to impossible, and equipment modifications that pushed their aircraft to operational limits. Nakamura's Raptor received special attention from maintenance crews, who worked through the night installing systems that didn't appear in any technical manual. Electronic warfare pods that could mimic the signatures of aircraft from multiple nations, weapons systems that left minimal forensic evidence, and communication equipment that could route through satellite networks belonging to countries that weren't officially involved in Middle Eastern operations. Her pre-flight inspection revealed modifications that transformed her aircraft from a conventional fighter into something designed for missions that existed in the gray areas between warfare and espionage. Each system represented capabilities that few pilots were cleared to know about, much less employ in combat operations. The other squadron members watched these preparations with expressions ranging from concern to professional curiosity. They understood that they were witnessing something that would never appear in official histories, a mission that would be successful only if it remained invisible to everyone except those who needed to know. Lieutenant Walsh approached Nakamura during the final equipment check with the kind of hesitant respect that indicated a fundamental shift in their relationship. "Ghost 2, Vera, is there anything we should know before you launch?" The use of her actual name rather than call sign marked a moment of transition from professional courtesy to personal connection. Nakamura paused in her inspection of the aircraft's targeting systems, considering how much truth could be shared without violating security protocols that had been classified above her clearance level. "Some missions require skills that aren't taught in flight school," she finally said. "My sister made sure I learned those skills before I needed them." It was perhaps the longest personal statement anyone in Ghost Squadron had heard her make, and it carried implications that would take years to fully understand. Elena Nakamura's legacy was more than just combat records and classified operations. It was a philosophy about warfare that prioritized mission success over personal recognition, effectiveness over ego, and the kind of quiet professionalism that made legends possible. The weapons loading process required 3 hours and personnel with security clearances that exceeded those of most squadron members. Nakamura's Raptor would carry a mixed loadout designed to handle multiple contingencies: air-to-ground missiles for the primary target, air-to-air weapons for self-defense, and electronic countermeasures that could disrupt enemy sensors without revealing American involvement. As dawn broke across the desert, painting the sky in shades that reminded everyone of the beauty that existed alongside the violence, Captain Vera Ghost Nakamura climbed into an aircraft that had been transformed from a fighter into an instrument of policy. Her mission would determine whether thousands of innocent people lived or died, whether regional stability was maintained or collapsed into chaos, and whether the legend that was building around her call sign was based on skill or simply luck. The engine spooled up with a sound like controlled thunder, and Ghost 2 rolled toward a runway that pointed toward a horizon filled with possibilities both terrible and magnificent. The pre-dawn darkness over the Syrian desert was absolute, broken only by stars that seemed impossibly bright in air unpolluted by civilization. Captain Nakamura's F-22 Raptor cut through the night at 42,000 feet, its stealth technology rendering it invisible to radar systems that had been designed to detect less sophisticated aircraft. Her route took her through airspace that belonged to 4 different nations, none of which would appreciate unauthorized overflight by American military aircraft. The mission planning had required threading a path between radar coverage zones, surface-to-air missile sites, and patrol routes that changed based on intelligence updates that were hours old by the time they reached operational commanders. Overwatch, this is Ghost 2, crossing checkpoint Alpha 3, all systems nominal. Her radio transmission was encrypted and routed through satellite networks that would make it nearly impossible to track back to its source. Copy Ghost 2. Target convoy is maintaining course and speed. Estimated time to interdiction window is 47 minutes. The target was moving through terrain that had witnessed thousands of years of human conflict, following roads that had been used by armies since before recorded history. The chemical weapons components they carried represented humanity's latest innovation in mass destruction, a technological advancement that made conventional warfare seem almost quaint by comparison. Nakamura's tactical display painted the battle space in precise detail. Enemy air defense sites glowed like electronic constellations, their radar beams sweeping the sky in patterns that revealed gaps a skilled pilot could exploit. The convoy itself was moving with military precision, its escorts maintaining formation that suggested professional training and combat experience. Somewhere below, surface-to-air missile crews were scanning the darkness with sensors that should have been able to detect any aircraft within 50 miles. Their failure to identify her Raptor was a testament to both American technology and her own skill at managing her aircraft's electromagnetic signature. The first challenge came at the Syrian border, where intelligence had identified a sophisticated air defense network that included equipment capable of tracking even stealth aircraft. Nakamura's approach required flying through a narrow corridor between overlapping radar zones, maintaining precise altitude and heading that left no margin for error. Her aircraft's electronic warfare systems came alive as enemy sensors swept past her position. Threat warning displays flickered with indications of multiple targeting radars, but her stealth technology and careful route planning kept her invisible to systems that should have painted her with deadly precision. Ghost 2, be advised. Enemy air activity detected in your patrol zone. 2 fighters launching from Damascus, bearing 045 at your position. The warning carried the tension that always accompanied potential air-to-air combat. The Syrian fighters were Russian-made Su-35, advanced aircraft flown by pilots who had learned their craft in the brutal school of Middle Eastern warfare. They were climbing toward her altitude with the aggressive profile that indicated they had some kind of sensor contact, even if their targeting systems couldn't achieve a weapons-quality lock. Nakamura's tactical computer calculated intercept courses and engagement envelopes with the cold precision of mathematics applied to murder. The enemy fighters would pass within 10 miles of her position, close enough that visual identification became a possibility despite the darkness and her aircraft's low observable characteristics. She adjusted her flight path with control inputs so slight they barely registered on her instruments, threading between the enemy patrol and her target convoy with navigation precision that required both technological superiority and pilot skill that few possessed. The Syrian fighters continued their search pattern, their radar signatures indicating frustration at contacts that appeared and disappeared like electronic ghosts. The convoy had stopped. Nakamura's sensors detected heat signatures that suggested vehicles had been halted for reasons that intelligence couldn't determine from satellite coverage. The delay meant her carefully planned approach would arrive at a static target rather than moving vehicles, changing tactical requirements in ways that demanded instant adaptation. Overwatch Ghost 2. Target has assumed defensive positions. Request permission to proceed with modified engagement profile. The silence that followed lasted long enough to indicate that decisions were being made at levels far above normal operational command. Political considerations were being weighed against military necessity, with consequences that would ripple through diplomatic channels regardless of mission outcome. Ghost 2 cleared to engage, mission parameters unchanged. Deniability remains essential. Translation: destroy the chemical weapons without creating evidence that could be traced back to American involvement. Avoid civilian casualties that would generate international outrage, and accomplish both objectives while flying solo through the most heavily defended airspace in the Middle East. Nakamura's first attack run came from the northwest, using a mountain ridge to mask her approach until the final seconds before weapon release. Her targeting system identified the convoy's command vehicle and primary cargo trucks with infrared precision that revealed details invisible to conventional